Okay, so let's check out the media item mouse modifiers in Reaper. We can just click an item, open up our preferences, and it automatically goes to the media item context. It's a bit of a time saver. So let's start off with the left click. By default, it's going to select an item and move the edit cursor. So if we left click on a media item, it moves the edit cursor and it selects the item. But we can change that behavior. Double click it, and there's a bunch of other options. Now if you notice, right over here, there's a bullet point, letting us know that this is the default. Select item and move edit cursor. So if we change it to just select the item, we see a bullet there, letting us know this isn't the default action. So if we ever want to change it back, just double click it, find the one with the bullet, and we're back to our default. And if you see one with a different bullet point, you'll know that it changed. So let's put this all back by resetting them. And let's just change this one. If we choose select item instead, now if we left click, it's going to select an item, but it doesn't move the edit cursor. So that'll stay put while we select it. So now to move the edit cursor, we have to click on our ruler or right above the item over here. Because clicking it just selects it. It doesn't move the edit cursor. A next option, we could select and move the edit cursor ignoring snap. So if we turn on snapping right here, when we click, it's not going to snap to our grid. Whereas by default, right here, it will. So if we click it, it snaps to the grid. But we could change it to ignore it. And once again, this is the default. We can assign these things to have different modifiers instead. So we can put this back to our default and do things with modifiers instead. Now the menu is the same for any of them, but many options become available when we use modifiers. And if you notice, most of these aren't even being used. So if you need certain things, either assign them to the unused modifiers or just change the defaults. So let's change this one here to toggle item selection. So by default, it still works the same way by clicking, but if we hold down Control, it just toggles the item selection. Click it again, they become unselected. Let's change this to something else. We could add a range of items to the selection, which is the default for Shift right here. Click it again, and they get added to the selection, but it doesn't toggle. And there's a few different options here. In addition to adding a range to the selection, we can extend the time selection. So now if we click it and click it again, it makes a time selection. Let's turn off snapping, and we can extend it just by clicking with that modifier, or make it shorter on either side. Another option down here is to extend the time selection. So if you have a time selection like this, I can hold down Control and it extends it automatically without adding a range of items to the selection, like Shift does. But something that's more interesting is down here. To restore to previous zoom scroll, let's say we zoomed in right over here. Now we can hold down Control or any modifier, click it, and it reverts to the previous zoom scroll. And it can go in levels. So we can go in a little bit, a little more, a little more. Every time we Control click it, it goes back one step until we're back to here. and it can be assigned to any of them, because all the options are the same in this context. We could also choose to add stretch markers, which by default is Command-Option, or on PC would be Control-Alt. This will add a stretch marker when we click the item. So if we hold it down, it adds a stretch marker in every spot. And finally, probably the coolest function is down here, the action list. With this option, we could add any action that's in the action list. So we could type in item mute, choose toggle mute right here, and now if we hold on this modifier, we can mute things just by clicking the media item. Click it, and it mutes it. Click it again, and it unmutes it. So it toggles on mute very quickly. And we could do the same thing with any action, like volume. Let's choose item volume. We could nudge items down 1 dB. Now if we use that modifier and click it, that item jumped down 1 dB. Do it again, and it keeps getting lower and lower. It's pretty cool. So those are the options with the media item context for left click. There's a whole bunch of new ones when we choose left drag. By default, we can move the item ignoring time selection. So even with the time selection over here, we can just drag this and it moves. If we hold down Shift, it's going to ignore snap as well. So if we turn on snapping, normally, if we drag it, it's going to snap to our nearest grid point. But if we hold down Shift, it won't do that. So by using the Shift modifier, we can perform that function. By holding down Command or Control on the PC, we could copy and make a copy, just like that. We can copy ignoring snap. We can move just the contents by holding down Option or Alt. And that just moves the contents inside without changing the outside. That's great for adjusting takes. And there's a few other favorites I skipped over. In media item left drag, if we go to move item contents, I showed you just move. But there's a few other hidden options that are really worth checking out. Down over here, we can choose vertically. With this option chosen, we can just move items vertically. So let's make another track. And if I go to move this, it's going to go down or up, but I can't go side to side. So it's great for keeping the timing of the item, but moving it to different tracks, like this or like this. We could also choose also move time selection. So if there's a time selection over here, and we move this item, the time selection goes with it. And we could choose ripple editing down here. The first option lets us disable ripple editing. Now this is better used. Let's put this back to default. This is better used with some of our modifiers. So down over here, we'll choose move item and disable ripple edit. So if ripple editing is turned on, right here, we move it around, behaves like this. But if we hold down Control or Start on the PC, it turns it off. So it'll turn off ripple editing just while we hold the modifier down. Well, normally it acts like this. But we could do it the opposite way as well. Instead of disabling it, we could turn it on. So now if it's turned off over here, it works normal. Hold down the modifier, and it turns on. So it's a lot quicker than turning it on and off from here. Then it goes back to normal when we turn off the modifier. We can adjust the pitch by holding down Shift and Option or Shift and Alt. It adjusts the pitch of the item. We could render the item to a new file. We could adjust the item volume as a default. Just grab it. Adjust the volume fine tune. Adjust the pan to the right or to the left. This is one of my favorites. We can marquee select items. We can choose to just select them. If we want to select these items, hold on that modifier, or in this case, it's the default, and just drag, and it selects everything we marqueed, or drew a square around, like this. Usually, we'll use that with a modifier. So we'll put this back to its default, and do it with Control or Start. Marquee select items, just select them, ignore the snap, or one of my favorites, set time selection. So now it's going to create a time selection at the same time. Hold down Control, it marquee selects them, and creates a time selection at the same time, which is great for cutting items based on a time selection. Just choose it like this, and go to Cut Items within Time Selection, and it removes them in one step. And there's a few other options with Marquee. We could toggle the selection or add to selection. We could also choose to select time, which is going to create a time selection. Select time ignoring snap, or another one of my favorites, Marquee Zoom. If we combine this with the option I showed you before, under left click, change this to restore previous zoom and scroll. Now if we drag, it's going to marquee zoom, and if we click, it's going to go back to the previous zoom. Check it out. Hold on the modifier, we get a marquee zoom tool, select our area, it zooms in. Now we can hold the modifier down and just click it, and it goes back to where we started. This is easier to see with more tracks, so let's duplicate this a few times. Now let's use it to zoom on these two tracks. Let's go a little further. And we can back up just by clicking with that modifier. And we're back where we started. So that's a good one to know. And that's the marquee zoom right here. And by default, it's not really set up, so it's definitely worth knowing. So that's for left drag. We also have double click. This decides what happens when we double click a media item. By default, it's going to open a media item in the media editor, and an audio item is going to show the media item properties. Now if we double click this item, it opens up the media item properties for that item. But again, we can change that. We could choose Set Time Selection to Item, which is the default when you hold down Shift. And now if we double click, the time selection changes to the size of that item. We could set our loop points, open media items in external editors, show our take list by holding down Shift and Option, or Shift and Alt, double click, and we can choose our takes right here. And once again, we could use our action list. So we can mute an item right here. So if we double click it, it's going to mute. Double click it again, it unmutes. So those are the options with the media item context. And there's a few other contexts that are also based on media items. And we're going to go through those in the next video. Just click right here. So let's check those out.